It has been great getting to see a number of old friends I haven't seen in a long time, including David. And an interesting thing about them, and I think a tribute to the conference, is that a number of them I had been keeping in like different parts of my brain. So like David I had kind of had filed under science, and Kevin Kelly, like techno-visionary, and Brian Swim, kind of cosmic spirituality. And now here they all are in the same room. And I think, that's that kind of synergy is what this is about. So I want to thank the organizers, Sheila, for all the work you did to put this together. And thanks to Ben for being the prime mover, as they say in theology. Listen, there's two kinds of bad dreams you can have about giving a talk. One is, of course, the one where you like 5 minutes before the talk, you realize you're supposed to give a talk. You're not ready, and it's horrible. That, for me, is the most common kind and the most horrifying. But there's a second kind of bad dream about talks, which is less common, somewhat less horrifying. But that's where you realize, as the talk approaches, that you promised to cover much more ground than you can possibly cover in the time allotted. I looked about a week ago at the abstract I had sent Sheila and realized it was basically like a 95-word book proposal. So I'm going to kind of be living out that second bad dream in front of your eyes as you look on in horror. I want to apologize. I'll try to cover pretty much everything I promised to cover in the abstract. I will have to go over some things pretty fast, probably. Feel free to buttonhole me afterwards and demand clarification. Okay, so there's Teilhard's great work, The Phenomenon of Man, published in French in 1955, a few months after he died, I think. In English in 1959. It created quite a stir upon publication. Here's something that was written about it in 1961, describing the reception. It is a book widely held to be of the utmost profundity and significance. It created something like a sensation upon its publication in France. And some of the reviewers hereabouts called it the book of the year, the book of the century. Now, as it happens, that was written, that's part of a book review of The Phenomenon of Man, written by Peter Medawar, a prominent biologist. Some of you may know he was not a big fan of Teilhard, so it won't surprise you to see that the next sentence was, yet the greater part of it, I shall show, is nonsense, and so on. This is probably the most famous Teilhard put down that I'm aware of. You see it cited every once in a while. It's in a certain sense understandable. I mean, the book it's a very difficult book. As some people say, parts of it read more like poetry than prose. It's true that Teilhard sometimes prefers kind of enthusiastic pronouncement to careful linear argument. And it's not, he doesn't always, at least by my light, signal in the book an awareness of where kind of empirically based argument leaves off and metaphysical speculation begins. And in addition, of course, he had theological commitments that many scientists don't share. So it's not surprising that he has not been, I would say, warmly received in the scientific community broadly, certainly not by evolutionary biologists. But I think that's a shame and in a way reflects a certain kind of myopia. I think, what Teilhard was great at was getting the big picture. He stepped back and took in the entire evolutionary process in the broadest possible sense of that term. And he saw things that other people didn't see. And they are, I think, philosophically important, politically important, spiritually important. And some of them have been, I think vindicated. I mean, there weren't a lot of people in the 1920s and 30s saying, you realize we're building a giant global brain, right? He was, and turns out he was right. I basically want to argue today that if you look at some of the broad brushstrokes of the picture he painted, they are scientifically defensible, and more so than they're given credit for. Now, in some cases, I mean, you can really argue compellingly for them on scientific grounds. In other cases, I just mean they're scientifically respectable. They're hypotheses you can examine and argue about and invoke empirical evidence and so on. So why don't we get started? There's four broad brush strokes, four big Teilhard claims I want to look at. The biological evolution has a direction. Of course, we're talking about a growth in complexity, an ascent to higher and higher levels of organization. There's been a certain amount of discussion of that at the conference. Now, biological evolution is just one part of a larger evolutionary thrust, which naturally sustains that direction toward higher levels of complexity and levels of organization. Okay, and of course, Teilhard certainly meant to include prebiotic evolution, the whole history of the universe, but he also meant to talk about what is sometimes called cultural evolution, that process that our species launched, which, and here culture is meant very broadly. Technology, science, religion, basically all non-genetically transmitted information is part of culture. And of course, cultural evolution leads to the noosphere. And maybe one thing that could come out of this conference is somebody straightening me out on the proper way to pronounce that word. I'm aware of at least three options. I'm going with noosphere. And of course, the process is also intertwined with the construction of the noosphere. So then, this directionality has a moral and spiritual dimension. Teilhard would be more inclined to use the word spiritual than moral, but I think the two are closely related, I'll argue, and what I would call moral development is very closely related to what he would call spiritual. And then evolution has a larger purpose. Now, this is the most controversial among evolutionary biologists. I mean, I have, there's a conversation of me and Steven Pinker on YouTube. We're kind of arguing about this. And, the way the conversation started was I saw him react to something that I had written. He reacted on Twitter to something I had written, and I just thought that indicated that he really hadn't, had not been willing to seriously entertain a hypothesis and hadn't understood what I was saying. But you get a lot of that from evolutionary biologists. And I want to emphasize that doesn't have to involve any kind of so-called spooky forces in evolution. You can be a straight Darwinian and still believe that the process of evolution has a larger purpose. Okay, let's start with biological evolution has a direction. Okay, so, again, we're talking about a growth in complexity. And it's pretty clear there has been that in biological evolution, right? Over time, get more and more complex organisms. That's not to say that every lineage grows inexorably in complexity. A lineage, you can see a decline in complexity. But still, if you look at kind of what I would call the outer envelope of complexity, in other words, if at any point in time you say, well, what are the most complex creatures we've got, right? And then you fast forward 100 million years, as a rule, it grows, right? You get the outer envelope of complexity grows. And even when there's a setback, a mass extinction, the kind of engine behind this is so strong that you see recovery. And very importantly, one kind of complexity you see is behavioral complexity, growth in behavioral flexibility. That's important because it's linked to intelligence. And ultimately, if you're going to get the noosphere launched, you need at least one species that's intelligent enough to launch it, right? So the question of how likely the evolution of an intelligent species is an important one as we appraise the idea that there's a kind of directionality here, okay? Which isn't to say that it was certain that you would get an intelligent species, but was it kind of probabilistic? Was it likely enough so that you can say it was kind of in the cards given enough time, right? I mean, that's what I would say is, we're talking about a probabilistic directionality here. And on that question, biologists disagree. John Maynard Smith would say, no, it was not likely. And he says it in this book. He's no longer with us, but he was one of the great evolutionary biologists of the 20th century. He looks at some of the thresholds that life has to cross before you get to something like a human species with the intelligence of a human species. And he thinks they're pretty daunting. So that's his view. But there are, evolutionary biologists of equal prominence who disagree. William Hamilton, also no longer with us, but, author of the theory of kin selection, roughly a John Maynard Smith's level of stature in biology, believed that the evolution of intelligent life was extremely likely. But the main point I want to make is that you can argue, as Hamilton's view suggests, you can argue the case from a straight, Darwinian view of evolution. Now, I'm not saying Teilhard had one of those. Teilhard certainly understood natural selection, thought it played an important role in evolution. And the question of to what extent he thought supplementary forces were involved is one I'm not equipped to address. He had his eminent Darwinian defenders, Julian Huxley, the geneticist Dochanski. But in any event, my point is that one needn't depart from a scientific framework to argue that the evolution of growing complexity, the ascent to higher levels of organization, and ultimately the evolution of intelligent life was extremely likely. You can argue it either way, but it's not crazy. Second claim. Biological evolution is but one part of a larger evolutionary thrust which naturally sustains that direction. Well, certainly, if we're talking about cultural evolution, which again is involved with the eventual blossoming of the noosphere, it has, in fact, sustained the biological evolution's direction. You get more and more complex social structures, get to higher and higher levels of organization. 12, 15,000 years ago, the most complex social structure on the planet was a hunter-gatherer village. Agriculture gets invented, and you get these multi-village polities called chiefdoms. Writing gets invented, and you get urban civilization, city-states, states, and so on. And eventually, you get globalization. You get to where we are today, on the verge of forming a global community. We haven't succeeded yet, but it's obviously conceivable that we could, and that represents an ascent, very reminiscent of the one we saw in biological evolution. So, in fact, there has been a continuation of that impetus. Now, the question, and I think it's an important one, of how likely that was, and I say it's important for purposes of assessing some philosophical commitments of Teilhard's, some of which I share. But how likely was it? I have argued at book length that it was very likely. That's the book. And I want to quickly say kind of what my argument is. This is one of the things I'm going to go over so fast that you'll have to trust me. I'm right. If you can express doubt face to face later, but I ask you to trust. So the argument basically is that it's in the nature of technological evolution that first of all, non-zero-sum games, right? A game that can be win-win or lose-lose. So if you play your cards right, you can both benefit. It's not a zero-sum game is one where there has to be a winner and a loser, right? So tennis singles is a zero-sum game. Everything's, good for one person, bad for the other. But if you're playing doubles on your side of the net, it's completely non-zero-sum. Everything's either good for both of you, bad for the other. I argued that new technologies come along that either facilitate or otherwise encourage the playing of non-zero-sum games involving more and more people over greater and greater distances. And that's what drives the process. Now, zero-sum dynamics are important too because they sometimes incentivize the playing of non-zero-sum games. So conflict between groups encourages the development of non-zero-sum dynamics within groups. Of course, we've gotten to a point of in history where it would be nice to dispense with the conflict between groups, and it's no longer serving any useful purpose it may have served. But anyway, that's the argument. Some of the obviously important technologies or information, communication technologies, transportation technologies. But I spend a lot of time arguing that it really was pretty much an unstoppable process. It was inevitable that we would get to where we are, given long enough. The question whether we'll cross the threshold to a global community is, I think, more iffy. I spent a few chapters in the book applying the non-zero-sum, zero-sum framework to biological evolution, explaining why the growth of complexity is so likely in biological evolution using the terminology of game theory. So you can, in principle, have a single analytical framework that encompasses both of those evolutions, I think. Conceivably, you could apply it to prebiotic evolution. I've seen some things that made me think that, but I haven't really thought it through. Let's see. I just want to say one more thing is that I focus a lot in the book on the ongoing development of what I call the social brain. And it goes way, way, way back. Inevitably, when the non-zero sum kind of webs expand, you're seeing the intellectual exchange over longer and longer distances that constitute a kind of social brain. That's the budding of the noosphere, you could say, and it's just inextricably intertwined with this growth and complexity. Because the more robust the noosphere, this infrastructure for communication, the faster technology evolves, and some of the technologies in turn facilitate the intellectual synergy, the communication. So I guess we're ready to move on to another. So evolution's directionality has a moral and spiritual dimension. Okay. Now here we get to Teilhard's emphasis on consciousness, on sentience, on the fact that it is, as Thomas Nagel put the definition of consciousness, on the fact that it is like something to be us. Now, in that Medawar review, Medawar quotes Teilhard's assertion that evolution is, quote, an ascent toward consciousness, and he seems to be mocking him. It's hard to say because, mockery so pervades that review. It's just kind of the default assumption about a sentence in that review. But he seems kind of skeptical, but I think it's a completely defensible claim. I mean, I think, again, the growth of, I think certainly most scientists would agree with the conjecture that the growth of certain kinds of biological complexity of information processing, especially as manifest in a brain, probably, it involves richer and richer forms of consciousness. I think, I think Teilhard, this is an important contribution. I don't think a lot of people were talking about that before Teilhard. And one reason it's important, and here we start coming to the question of a moral and spiritual dimension, is, consciousness is, in my view, the thing that gives life meaning, right? It's the fact that we can apprehend beauty and feel love and so on that gives life meaning. The fact that we can feel anything, that it's like anything to be alive. If you imagine a planet full of organisms that look just like us, behave just like us, They say things, sound waves come out, they enter the ears of other people and cause those people to respond appropriately, but there's no subjective experience. It's not like anything to be anybody, okay? There's no awareness, no consciousness, no pleasure, no pain. If I told you I was going to go destroy one of those organisms, you probably wouldn't be morally outraged in the way you would if I told you I was going to kill a person, right? It's just not clear that there would be any moral stakes at all if it weren't for sentience, which, as we were usefully reminded by Robert Lawrence Kuhn, is a complete mystery. The whole thing about consciousness, there's just no consensus on what it is. So, you could see evolution as a machine for generating meaning, okay? And a machine for generating moral meaning. And that's why these questions of directionality are important. That's one reason. I mean, if you believe that this was all likely, that you get more and more complex information processing, ultimately at a kind of a human level, then you can say that about evolution. It just looked like a machine for generating meaning and moral meaning. Now, as for the question of the correspondence to what we might call, something spiritual, well, first of all, Teilhard equated consciousness with what he called spiritual energy. So he would say that, by definition, the growth of consciousness is a movement towards something spiritually important. But I don't think that's. I think there's a lot more that you can say on that subject. Now, I want to talk about. So Jaron Lanier mentioned what he called the circle of empathy and kind of mentioned Peter Singer's name. I'm not sure if Jaron was talking about this, the argument that Peter makes in his book, but I don't think he uses the term circle of empathy so much in this book. It's more like a circle of moral consideration. And his argument is that it has grown through history. So, as he puts it, there was a time when members of one Greek city-state considered members of another Greek city-state just subhuman, worthy of murder and enslavement or whatever. But then they decided, finally the moment came when they decided, okay, all Greeks are people. They deserve decent treatment. It's just the Persians and other people like that. And he tells this, he quotes this thing from Plutarch's biography of Alexander the Great, okay? Alexander the Great's tutor was Aristotle, okay? And, I mean, by the way, you talk about your white male privilege, right? Like, you get Aristotle as your tutor? Like, yeah, you could get into a good college probably that way. But Aristotle was, at that point, at the acme of enlightenment in theory, but according to Plutarch, he advised Alexander to treat Greeks as kindred, but to treat non-Greeks, quote, as though they were plants or animals. And Peter's point is, we don't talk this way anymore. Now, that's not to say we don't treat people that badly ever, but at least you don't have the world's great philosophers talking like that anymore. We at least pay lip service to the idea that people everywhere are worthy of moral consideration, decent treatment, regardless of race, creed, or color. And I think he's right that that's an advance, that there's been this expansion of the circle of moral consideration. Now, what drove it? Well, there's one argument in his book that I think has some merit and is probably part of the process. I made an argument in my book Non-Zero that is not incompatible with it. You could view it as supplementary, but it gets back to this idea of non-zero-sum dynamics. And the basic idea is that when you perceive the fact that you're in a non-zero-sum relationship with someone, you're kind of more tolerant. You're less critically judgmental. If you think you can work together toward a common goal, I mean, I'm not a business person. I don't know how things really work when they get together, but here's my conjecture is like two people meet on an overseas flight or something. They're from different countries, different religions, and they both have companies and they realize they can do business together to their mutual benefit. Well, I just think that's not a moment where one of them says, oh, and by the way, I think your religion is very primitive. But the key point is, I think they're less likely to even think it, okay? I think you naturally judge people more charitably when you believe that you can work together toward a common goal, or you're in the same boat. Maybe you're fending off some threat. Maybe you're in a labor union, and there's a black person and a white person on strike together, marching in the picket line. They're probably not likely to feel deep racial animosity, right? They're working together toward a common goal. And I think this is a kind of intuitive thing, and I think it reflects the fact, I think it's a fact, in which case it reflects this, that natural selection kind of designed, built into us the emotional infrastructure for successfully navigating a landscape of zero-sum and non-zero-sum dynamics. That's not all good news, but there is some good news, I think, including that. I used to, when my book first came out, I used to kind of joke by way of illustrating this. One reason I don't want to bomb the Japanese is they built my minivan. And what I meant was not just like, there goes the factory, but like, I like the minivan. Thank you. I felt like that. And if you want to see how readily the perception of zero-sum relations can lead to a very different attitude toward people. Just look at some of the things that were said about Japanese people in America during World War II. It's unbelievable. Things that were on the cover of major magazines. You wouldn't believe it. And so whether you perceive yourself to be in a zero-sum situation or non-zero-sum situation with another person, another group, can shape your degree of sympathy for them, your degree of tolerance for their traditions, and so on, I believe. In other words, it's kind of equipment we have for recognizing almost unconsciously when concord is in our self-interest, right? When harmony with other people and groups is in our self-interest, and helping that happen, which is good because right now, as you know, the world could use more concord. A lot of problems that can only be solved collectively. Climate change, obviously. I would say a growing number of problems. Biotech, it's more and more plausible that someone in some obscure lab could be building a bioweapon or just doing ill-advised research that comes back to haunt us. We need, and that's a problem that where the consequences cross international bounds. So it's something that needs to be addressed via international governance. By the way, Kevin, when you put up the world governance slide, I was going to stand up and say, no, Kevin, that freaks people out. Call it world governance. The other thing, one reason I use the term international governance is that some of the solutions are going to be regional, right? It isn't always global, but I am a big fan of global governance. The governance of outer space. There's more and more junk floating around in outer space that could trigger an actual chain reaction. It's called the Kessler effect that destroys just satellite after satellite, wipes out our whole outer space communications infrastructure. There's a growing militarization of outer space. These are things that can only be handled at the international level. Artificial intelligence, I think, requires a concerted international kind of guidance of, a number of people in the business. You don't often see a bunch of people from a business appeal for regulation at the international level. I don't recall ever seeing it, but a number of people in this field have, and I think it's with good reason. It's urgently in our interest to get together on this. So we need enough global concord to address these issues, which is another way of saying we need a cohesive noosphere, right? Not like a fragmented, we don't need like two noospheres. We need one And yet, obviously, we're not exactly in a state of global concord. If anything, I would say things are looking worse. There's a kind of unfortunate irony. On the one hand, we have the technological infrastructure for international collaboration, not just communication, but collaborative tools, tools for conferencing with people halfway around the world, solving problems with them. But the same kind of technology is deepening fissures among groups, among tribes, as it's sometimes put. Ideological groups, national groups, and so on. I'm thinking in particular of social media. AI, if it's not handled well, could deepen that problem, I think. So that's a kind of irony, that we have the infrastructure for the global brain, but we're getting there. Now, that's the way things were in Teilhard's day, and there had been a lot of conflict. He was very aware of the problem. And this is what he had to say about it. So humanity is building its composite brain beneath our eyes. May it not be that tomorrow, through the logical and biological deepening of the movement drawing it together, it will find its heart, without which the ultimate wholeness of its powers of unification can never be fully achieved. And, he was optimistic. Now, he had grounds for optimism that aren't going to be shared by everyone. They had to do with his metaphysical beliefs, his theological commitments. If you ask me to sound optimistic about, I'm not an optimistic person by nature, but if you ask me to sound optimistic, I'd say, well, if you look at what is sometimes called the psychology of tribalism, I think that's a misleading term, and to some people it's an offensive term. But anyway, it's apparently what we've got. I think the drivers of that psychology are largely a collection of cognitive biases, some of which get a lot of attention, confirmation bias, some of which get less. But one thing about these is that knowing about them isn't enough. We've all heard about confirmation bias, but we all still suffer from it to some extent. And there's an even subtler bias called attribution error. And just quickly, what happens there is when your enemies or rivals do bad things, you attribute that to their essential character. They're just bad people. When they do good things, you explain it away as a kind of expedient response to transient circumstances. They're not good people. Whereas with you and your allies, it's the opposite. You do bad things, it's because you had a stressful day. Your child does bad things, they didn't get their nap. Your child's rival does bad things, it's a bad kid. This is the way attribution error works. It's really hard. It's so subtle. And if you pay attention, once you're aware of it, it drives so much international conflict and sustains so much international conflict. It's reflected in the way we cover the behavior of our enemies. You see it in the media. It's very pernicious. And, the only time I would say I have felt at a place where overcoming it wasn't a big challenge is like day 5 of a meditation retreat. Okay, that's how stubborn it is. And that's how hard it is in the course of, your everyday life to overcome these things. And that's why I personally think that if we're going to solve the problem we face, we're at this climactic point where we have all these non-zero-sum games we need to play internationally. Some of them are arguably existential. We're not getting around to playing them very effectively because of this kind of conflict between tribes. And I think we're going to address that. It's going to require something you could call spiritual progress. I just think this psychology of tribalism is so deeply entrenched in us that the only way to overcome it is to really make a kind of progress that I would qualify as spiritual. Now, I was very happy to hear in conversation with Ilia Delio, whose talk on Teilhard was, I thought, one of the highlights of this conference yesterday, it was yesterday. She said Teilhard very much considered, engaging with and overcoming tribal conflict to be a spiritual thing. And in fact, just constructive engagement with the world he considered to be a spiritual thing. This is why I would say that I think the process of evolution, biological and cultural, has a spiritual direction. Various reasons that I've tried to lay out. Okay, quickly. Purpose, evolution. Okay, as I said, a lot of resistance to this. It's like you start talking to an evolutionary biologist about it, you need to give them a trigger warning. And the warning, what I would say is, by way of giving them the trigger warning, is just say, first of all, when I say biological evolution could have a purpose, I'm not saying it's driven by anything other than natural selection, okay? Could be, but even if it's not, the argument doesn't depend on that. And I'm far from sure it has a purpose. I think there's some evidence of it, as I will try to get to. And the second thing I say to try to calm them down is, if it has a purpose, it doesn't mean that a God gave it the purpose. A God could have, but could be an alien who came down and planted the seeds of life 3 billion years ago, and the seeds of life were designed to, or could be living in a simulation, and there's some hacker. It could also be that the purpose was imbued by a process, which I'll get to. Okay, so you've all heard Richard Dawkins. The subtitle, this book came out about 30 years ago. The subtitle, I think, is just wrong. I mean, why the evidence of evolution reveals a universe without design? The evidence from evolution doesn't say anything in particular about whether the universe at any level has design or has a purpose. And in fact, ironically, in the course of the book, he actually kind of lays the foundation for a kind of argument that biological evolution itself does have a purpose, okay? So let me quickly tell you what his argument is. So The Blind Watchmaker is a reference to this, more than 200-year-old theological treatise by Thomas Paley, or William Paley, I'm sorry, and was Thomas Paley president of CBS or something? Maybe not. But and his argument, Paley's argument is, look, you're walking through a field. You see a rock, you see a pocket watch. Okay? They're obviously different. The rock, it's just there. Who knows? But the pocket watch obviously is a product of design. You look at it, it's got this intricately interconnected stuff. Even if you don't know its purpose, it must have a purpose, right? It's clearly a product of design. And of course, Dawkins wanted to, and then Paley wanted to say, and so God designed, created animals. Dawkins wanted to say, no, we have another explanation, natural selection. He's right, we do. But I want to show you how Dawkins puts this. So he's saying this about Paley, and he says he had a proper reverence for the complexity of the living world, and he saw that it demands a very special kind of explanation. The only thing he got wrong, admittedly quite a big thing, is the explanation itself. Dawkins is a great writer. I mean, he and Medawar should have like a put-down face-off or something. But I want to emphasize this part. He saw that it demands a very special kind of explanation. So Dawkins is saying, yeah, there are two kinds of physical systems. Some require a special kind of explanation. They seem to have the hallmarks in some sense of design, maybe imbued with purpose. And he's also saying it's possible to inspect these systems and render a judgment as to whether they are a product of design, whether they have a purpose, okay? So I would like to apply that to the global superorganism, right? It's a physical system. So in principle, we can if Dawkins is right, you can look at any physical system and ask yourself, does it have the hallmarks of design and purpose? I want to stop here and say that, there are a number of Darwinians who are very comfortable applying that language to natural selection itself, okay? So Dan Dennett, for example, is fine with saying natural selection designs organisms and imbues them with a purpose. Now, the purpose is just getting genes into the next generation, not the highest calling, but it's a purpose, and he's comfortable with that language. Some people would put design in quotes, But the point is, they're comfortable saying that, that organisms have a purpose. Now, let's see. I think. Okay, so let's look at this. So this is, if you were going to ask yourself, Dawkins says, yeah, you can look at a squirrel and have a pretty good idea that it has some purpose, product of design. Well, I would say, then let's look at the global superorganism. And I would say, for starters, it kind of looks like an animal. It has a lot of features of an organism. That's why we call it a global superorganism. But I would also put emphasis, and look, I haven't done some deep philosophical investigation. I'm just saying one could look at what are the exact arguments that animals have the hallmarks of purpose and design. One could apply that to this. And I would also put even more emphasis on, the ontogeny, the development of a squirrel from egg to squirrel. That's what's analogous to kind of biocultural evolution. And now you see why I said, it is not, if you object to the argument that there may be purpose by saying, wait a second, we didn't need a special explanation for evolution. We know that it happened via natural selection. The reason that's not an adequate explanation, adequate objection, is because, you obviously couldn't say to Dawkins, well, look, squirrels don't need some special explanation like natural selection. We know how ontogeny works. It's just a physical process, that you get from egg to adult. Well, yeah, you do. It's a physical process. But the point is, it's such an amazing physical process. It seems so kind of bent on leading to a squirrel, which is an amazing thing, as to give you reason to suspect at least that the squirrel DNA is an algorithm that itself is the product of design. And Dan Dennett would say, yeah, it is the product of design of natural selection, okay? So I'm just saying it's possible. There's nothing crazy about this. It doesn't involve any spooky forces. I think it deserves, the possibility deserves more respect than it gets. I think I've thought about this enough to think I could say more by way of invoking evidence. Yes, this is, there is a real possibility that this is a system involving, that has a larger purpose, okay? Now, I want to say, I said, it could be, purpose can be imbued by a process. That's the way it is with animals. It's the process of natural selection. In the case of natural selection, you might ask, well, what could the process be? The answer is a certain variant of something called cosmological natural selection. Yeah, there was a session on this morning. I was too busy freaking out about my talk to attend, but so I'll tell you quickly. The idea is universes may replicate themselves. It's conjectural. But suppose, for example, the black holes are the way they replicate themselves, then there would be natural selection among universes over time, and you would eventually get universes with a lot of black holes. Well, suppose that one thing that facilitates a replication of a universe is intelligent life. Then you would get selection for universes that are conducive to the evolution of intelligent life. So that's just an example of how it could be, it needn't, not only needn't it be a god, it needn't be any kind of intelligent creature setting this in motion. And by the way, I hope people understand what I'm saying has nothing to do with what's called intelligent design. Different thing. It could be a process. Now, that said, I would say that, if I were a theologian, thinking about theology in an age of science, I would emphasize the fact that this is no ordinary process we're talking about. It seems to be a process that is moving toward a kind of spiritual and moral climax that is calling. Well, I'm loading the language, I guess. Now I'm turning into a theologian. When I start talking about being calling toward things, okay, it's pushing us, toward, I would say, moral enlightenment and a more spiritual worldview. Anyway, I just think the story that Teilhard is telling is an amazing story. Some of it is, I think, you can argue compellingly for in a thoroughly scientific way. I think some of it is, arguable. And I'm referring here to these specific brushstrokes these four big claims. There are things that Teilhard says that I don't buy, but these are the main contours, in a certain sense, of the story. And I think some of the things are certainly arguable, even conjectural, like purpose in evolution, but firmly should be within the bounds of scientific discourse if properly understood. I think the upshot is that it is in our interest and humanity's interest to cultivate the evolution of a globally coherent noosphere. For that to happen, I think you need people to get excited about the prospect. And there are different parts of the story that can excite different people. Some people don't care whether there's a larger purpose. Some people, but the story can still be compelling. Without that, some people want the purpose to be a god, and don't want to hear about any other kind of, or at least the imbuer of purpose to be a god. But some people like this idea of cosmological natural selection. They think that's cool. You mean I, through my efforts right now, can make it more likely that this universe will replicate, by helping the world congeal into kind of a harmonious noosphere and ensuring our own survival and the continued flourishing of the species? Yeah, sign me up. Different people like different things, and there are different elements of this story that can inspire people. So I want to say again, I think AI, I said that I think it's helping to kind of push us. It's another reason we need to get together on international governance. I just want to say quickly, it may provide some very valuable tools as well. It may help us cultivate kind of cognitive empathy and ability to understand other perspectives across tribal lines and so on. It would be great if it could adjudicate border disputes. We don't seem very good at it, right? We don't seem to be good at creating adjudicatory panels that are truly objective. I think there's hope there. I hope, if I got the slide set up, I want to close with a final slide. I was heartened in Ilya Delio's presentation to hear her use the word synergy and say that Teilhard resonated to the idea of synergy because that is another name for a non-zero-sum dynamic. If there's potential synergy between two things, there's a non-zero-sum relationship. And in fact, she used the phrase win-win, so clearly this isn't news to her, but I was very glad to hear that. And so I want to close with this slide that's actually from Philo of Alexandria, this quote from Philo of Alexandria. He lived at the time of Jesus. He was Jewish. He developed a Jewish theology that was based on the idea of the Logos. And, in the book of John, the first line, in the beginning was the Word. The word word is a translation of the Greek word logos, which means a lot more than the word word means to us. It was a philosophical concept. It kind of connoted a kind of like a logic running through history, even shaping history, driving history, kind of reasoning process. And I kind of think that in a way, the interplay of zero-sum and non-zero-sum dynamics, could be could be seen as playing some of that role, at least once you get life, a kind of a driver of the direction of things. And so, and one form of non-zero-sumness is when two people each have things that the other needs. That's why economic exchange is non-zero-sum. You'd rather have the product than the money. The merchant would rather have the money than the product. Non-zero-sum. You both have your needs. You meet them. So Philo, I just want to show you this. This is in the context of him describing the dynamics of the Logos. This is 2,000 years ago. I'll just let you read it. Everybody done? Okay, so I would just say, from his lips to God's ears, as they say. And thank you very much.
So I'm Francis Heiligend from the Human Energy and the Free University of Brussels. I think you probably missed my plenary this morning, where I was speaking specifically about the synergy and the win-win as a basic mechanism of evolution that creates synergy, that creates complexity, that creates consciousness. So in that sense, there is a moral dimension to evolution. The more synergy you create through self-organization, in a sense, the more moral the universe becomes, because there is less conflict, there is less suppression, etc. But I'm happy for your talk, because you reminded me of the one thing of Teilhard that I disagree with. So I agree with the first 3 points, but the last point about evolution having a purpose, I really think we don't need that. Not only don't we have any evidence for that, it's an assumption that does not lead anywhere, unless we would know what is that purpose, and then everything becomes determined. We can just assume that there is directionality in evolution, and directionality means that there are certain preferential developments towards more complexity, towards more intelligence, towards more consciousness, but you don't know how they are going to do. There can be many different ways of increasing intelligence. There can be many different ways of producing complexity. Maybe our civilization will disappear and be replaced by a different civilization. I don't think you need to assume that there is an end point to which we are moving. I believe that evolution continues forever and is continuously creating new things, and we cannot predict what will come out. We can just say there is the directionality towards increasing complexity, towards increasing morality, if you wish. But I don't see the point of having
purpose,
an end point.
Yeah, you're right. I did miss your talk. As I said, I was freaking out about mine. And also, I gather they're going to be on video. I'm planning to do some catching up. And yes, synergy and non-zero sumness, as I said, very much the same idea. On the question of purpose, you are one of the several categories of people, the ones who don't care about purpose, and there are a lot of people who do. I would contend that, and there are people who get inspired by it. Like, we want to inspire different kinds of people, right? I mean, we want to get different kinds of people engaged in the project of cultivating a harmonious world and the flourishing of the noosphere and the species. Some people care about it, but I'm not saying it just because of that. I actually believe you can make an argument that there is at least some evidence, and this is a longer argument we'd have to have. I can't settle it up here. There's more I would say. The thing I'll say for now is, if evolution is this directional process that starts with a very small amount of information and leads to this giant and leads to a much larger kind of coherently functioning superorganism over time, and it's not in some sense a product of design, then it's the only thing we've ever seen like that isn't. Because everything on this planet that fits that description everything on this planet that fits that description was designed by natural selection and is imbued with a purpose. Again, it's like, I don't think you can argue convincingly, persuasively, but I gotta say, it's pretty amazing. I also gotta say, like, if indeed the first strand of self-replicating information on this planet was the seed for a global superorganism, this is the most efficient algorithm in the history of algorithms, okay? Like, I think every computer scientist should take their hat off to that.
I just want to add one more concept that may replace the concept of purpose. That's the concept from complexity science of an attractor. They may be different attractors, meaning situations that were very likely to evolve towards. But an attractor is not the same as a purpose, but it can play that role in the sense that we have an attractor of a global superorganism, and we're quite likely to end up in that attractor, but something may go wrong and we end up...
Is the word is attractor that you're using?
Attractor, yeah.
Yeah, so you can see... So are you saying, for example... I mean, actually, Steven Pinker made an argument for moral realism that it's complicated, but his point was that the systems move toward the successful playing of non-zero-sum games, and that involves a certain kind of moral development. So you could see that as kind of an attractor, right? Now you're talking about that kind of thing, and you're saying that doesn't necessarily signify purpose?
No, it's a question of interpretation. I've written a long paper about attractors and purpose. You can interpret attractors as purpose in some case, but intrinsically they are not the same as purpose. But you can interpret them like that. So that's what I want to
They're not
offer
the same. That's true.
I want to offer this as a kind of a compromise solution that might make both sides happy, the ones that want to have purpose and the ones that don't want to have purpose.
I see. Well, yeah, that's a good example. You're right. I mean, some people, and in fact, the argument C. Pink was making was, the question of moral realism is the question is moral truth out there somewhere? Is there such thing as moral truth? And he was saying, he wasn't being a kind of a conventional realist, but he was saying, well, in some sense, there's like an attractor out there that draws us toward this. Now, for some people, that's better than being a nihilist, right? And so that's a perfect example of how many different kinds of things can appeal to people and inspire them. I agree.
I think there's one confusion here about the word evolution when describing the universe, and when we use the word purpose for that. I wonder if a word like development is a more accurate description of what's happening in the universe now. So seeing the unfolding of the universe as those tendencies that evolution has created for our universe through some of the processes you were explaining, that's being realized in our universe. So I wonder if using the word evolution as what we're seeing in the universe now, that's where the confusion is when we use the word purpose. So the tendencies were created without a purpose, but now the realization of it is through this developmental process. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts.
Again, I mean, first of all, evolution creates purpose. We have goals, we seek them. And there's certainly that. Now, I mean, are you suggesting the word development is in some ways better than evolution? Well,
when our body develops,
right.
We're not evolving right now. It's development, right? So, but it's realizing some of the purposes that could have been here without any purpose. So I wonder if the purpose is realized through the development, not the evolutionary process itself.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's a system with a purpose, I mean, arguing that a system has a purpose is the first step. That doesn't mean you know what the purpose is. The purpose, in a certain sense, could lie ahead. Now, as we heard, in Teilhard's theology, God is as much in the Omega as in the Alpha. Mm-hmm. And so the realization of something worthy of the name God could be part of the purpose. Maybe a global collective consciousness that is more worthy of the term than, say, the individual constituents like us are. You're right. You're right. The question of whether a system is purposive is different from the question of what the purpose is.
Yeah, because I think that's where actually Francis. Right. I think that's where Francis's confusion lies. I personally think it's that part about seeing that the purpose.
You're right. The development of an organism is not the purpose. Yeah. The purpose is to get genes in the next generation, and even the mature organism is just kind of a step toward the ultimate purpose, but is closer to it than the development.
Thank you.
My name is Julian Goff. I'm writing a book about the implications of cosmological natural selection, which I don't think have been fully seen. So I was thrilled when you mentioned it, because I think it's actually the missing thing in a lot of the talks over this conference, and it's the thing that makes sense of Teilhard and actually nails him to a scientific framework really firmly. I think he would have embraced the idea that the universe itself was the result of an evolutionary process at the levels of universes had he lived after the Big Bang rather than in a time when they assumed the universe was eternal and finite. I'm delighted you put it in there, but there's tremendous resistance to the idea, and it's never, I think, been properly engaged with at the level it deserved when Smolin came up with the idea. I'm just wondering, why do you think it has never gained traction and been taken as seriously as I think it deserves? Is it sociological or is it scientific?
Well, I mean, it's inherently pretty speculative. In that way, I admit it's like the idea that evolution is a manifestation of purpose. You know, one reason we're confident that squirrels have a purpose and animals have a purpose is there's a bunch of them to observe. We only have one evolutionary process to observe. No, I think it's better with the music, actually. I think it's
uplifting. We know, we feel we're going somewhere.
Kind of actually adds to my credibility.
But I think you can actually make predictions based on it. We have an N of 1 in this universe, but you can, like, I've made predictions that the James Webb is showing have actually happened.
Yeah.
With an N of 1, you should be able to see the evolutionary history of universes in the N of 1 that you can observe. And I think we can see
that. It's a totally cool idea, but it is pretty speculative. It's not that easy to amass evidence that our universe is a consequence of natural selection among universes. And by the way, even Lee Smolin, who coined the term cosmological natural selection, is a conversation of me and him online on YouTube. And he doesn't, he's a little skittish about the part where intelligent life may be the prerequisite for replication of universes. He stops at black holes. He did mention a name in that conversation of someone who had looked into it.
Louis Crane.
What?
I think Louis Crane has written 2 papers on that.
Yes. So I tracked him down, and there's a conversation with me and him online.
Excellent. And Clément Vidal has done some work in this area as well. It's very important.
Oh, good. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert. That was fantastic.